Welcome to Reset 2020. This is our 7th live show today, and it's great to have your company here with us. My name is Julia Keedy. I am your host today. I'm also the founder and the CEO of the X Factor Collective community. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Arakwal people, traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording here today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend to you I extend that respect to anyone here today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us. Today we have 3 fabulous philanthropy sector leaders with us as part of a 2-part series on philanthropy intentions and directions during and post COVID-19. This is all part of Reset 2020, a research study and live programming designed to help extend support and advice to as many organisations as possible during this most unusual time. Reset 2020 is part of the programming area in the collective and made free thanks to our partnership with Equity Trustees. The programming is having far-reaching impacts just over the last 6 weeks, and that's been aided. Sorry, just a little technical glitch on this end then. That's been aided by our many outreach partners, including Philanthropy Australia and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and many, many others. If this is your first experience with Reset 2020 and the collective, welcome. It's lovely to meet you. The X Factor Collective is a community where social change makers access support and advice from a trusted and experienced community of providers. Our mission is to improve well-being and hopefully reduce burnout by enabling change to happen in a more collaborative way. Before we get started and I share who I can see on my screen here with you today, I've got a couple of housekeeping notes. We are using Zoom's platform. Many of you are now probably very familiar with Zoom. And there's a couple of areas that I'll just let you know about today. In the chat box, on your chat box there, Jackie, who's here as tech support, is putting some phone links there for you right now. You might want to just take a little screenshot just of those phone links, just in case your link drops out and you want to come back in on the phone, you've got those phone links there. Today, we'll be hearing from our speakers for the first half of our session and then having time to answer your questions. So the way that we're taking questions today is in the Q&A box on Zoom. So if you're not familiar with that, just have a little look down the bottom of your screen there and you'll see Q&A. That's where we'd like you to lodge the questions. If you forget and put them in the chat box, don't you worry, Jackie will be there and remind you to pop them into the Q&A box. We are also recording this session today, and all of the Reset 2020 sessions are available as recordings and you can play them back at any time. So let's jump into it, shall we? I'm just going to share the screen so we can see everybody here today. Around the screen, I'm just going to introduce everybody. Across, it does feel very Brady Bunch this point in time, doesn't it? Across to my left, I have Dr. Catherine Brown, the CEO of Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Julia.
In the bottom left is Sarah Davies, CEO of Philanthropy Australia.
Hi, everybody.
And below me there is Jodi Kennedy, the General Manager of Charitable Trusts and Philanthropy from Equity Trustees.
Hello.
Great to have you all here today, and thank you. It has been an amazing calendar athletics the last 2 weeks of putting together the 2-part series, so great to have you here with us today. Sarah, let's kick off with you first. We're going to start by talking a bit about the recent survey that you've done with Philanthropy Australia with your funder members. It's going to be one of those days. Your funder members being those who make funding distributions and grants. In April, you issued a survey to see how COVID-19 was impacting their grant-making decisions and thinking. The link of this survey has been shared in your chat box at the moment, so you can go in and delve into this research. It's fabulous. You received 101 responses, so a really good indication of what's going on in your community. Alongside this, you've spoken with numerous, I can't probably imagine how many funders you've spoken to over the last few months. just looking at the bigger picture to begin with, what has stood out most to you?
Thanks, Julia. Look, I mean, I think in a really simple way, the response from Australian philanthropy at this time, first to the bushfires and then immediately with the COVID-19 health and economic crisis, has been nothing short of inspirational. I think Australian philanthropy's response over the last 3, 4, 5 months has just been extraordinary. And it's interesting. So, we've been reflecting after the GFC in sort of 2008, there actually was quite a lot of chatter and criticism of philanthropy, that perhaps it was a bit missing in action. And I was working for a foundation at the time, so I actually remember this. The foundations felt that they'd been hit, their corpus had been hit, they sort of retreated. They certainly weren't active in the advocacy and the discussion around the impact on community and community organisations. Now, I think it's the polar opposite. I think philanthropy has responded incredibly, strategically, generously, bravely. I think it's extraordinary. We'll have a look at some of that data. Yeah. If there is one little shadow side, it's that we have to remember that the philanthropic dollar as a proportion of the total dollar in the social change space is still pippy. So, whilst I think philanthropy has been extraordinary, we need more of it.
Yes. Yeah. More and better. Hey, Sarah?
Please.
So delving into the survey, and I guess to that point around sort of inspirational and seeing, action happen very quickly, 88% of funders said that they had changed or adapted their granting and operating approaches in response to COVID-19. Can you please share with us what type of changes they have or the changes that are being implemented?
Yeah, certainly. So this was within 6 weeks of COVID-19 hitting. 88% of the funders responding to this survey had already changed their grant-making practices. And so do we have that slide, Julia, to share?
Sure do.
So I'll just run you through the highlights. So down one, please. Number 4, that's it, that one. So you can see on this slide, the big green box, what most people had done was increase their flexibility. So, changing timelines, taking away some of the hoops that you have to jump through, perhaps, changing reporting requirements, basically being much more flexible with their grant partners and, taking off, relinquishing any of those sorts of obligations. That was 72% of them. The second most common response was that third sort of yellowy block. And this was 48% of our funders had basically shifted their funding to unrestricted grants, which is extraordinary. I just think that is fantastic. The third most common response was actually that 42% of them had increased the amount of grant funds available. So, that's half, if you like, of the respondents, over half with the flexibility, half of them then saying, okay, we're actually going to move to unrestricted grants, we'll take the ties off it. And then, nearly half of them putting more money out there. So, I mean, that as a majority response in 6 weeks, I think is freaking stunning. Yeah. Many of them have brought forward grant payments, 27% of them, so bringing forward distributions that they had planned for later in the year. Offerings financial support, 26% of them. 36% of them had suspended their kind of regular program in order to respond specifically to COVID-19 needs. And 32% of them had established new kind of COVID-19 grant programs.
Wow. It's extraordinary to see the breadth of the activity, isn't it, as well? Wow.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. I'm just going to stop that share there. Another part of the survey was that stood out was that 60% of those that responded were now offering grants to new grant partners. And this is interesting because this two-part series has come off the back of a broad range of questions that we've had so far with Reset 2020. And a lot of people feeling very paralysed and frozen around, you know, meeting with new funders and contacting new funders. So to see that 60% have actually working with new grant partners is really encouraging. So it does speak a lot to that topic of, you know, we're not sure whether to contact funders at this time. Can you give us a couple of examples of what you've seen in this area?
Yeah, and look, this was an important question because anecdotally, prior to running the survey, what we had heard from funders is they were doubling down with their existing relationships. And so a lot of the opening up and the generosity was going to their existing partners. And that is absolutely true. So it was really terrific to see that 60% of them were opening up to new partners. So within that 60%, the most common areas were outside of their regular program focus, so focused on COVID-19 needs, immediate relief, food security, response and recovery, still maintaining their bushfire commitments, and also a big increase in kind of collective funding. And maybe Catherine might talk about what the Lord Mayor's has done, because I think there's been an extraordinary collaborative effort to sort of, you know, design once, use many times, in people collaborating. Some interesting examples. So we have some funders who are proactively going out and reaching out to communities that they think are perhaps most forgotten to say, we're here to give you some money. We had one funder, for example, opened up a grants program and said it's non-competitive, everybody will get something. I mean, they may all not get a lot, but everybody will get something. We've had other funders who, because of their tax status, were really keen to support those communities and organisations that didn't have DGR status or may not have been registered with the ACNC. Again, going to a part of the community that doesn't generally get supported. So again, a really smart, generous response.
Yeah, wow. Brilliant to see 60%.
Yeah.
It was quite a surprising and refreshing number to see when the research first came out, for sure. Moving on into the next part that you asked in the survey was around advocacy, and just want to delve into that a little bit. 40% of those that participated said they are now engaging in advocacy on behalf of particular groups as part of their COVID-19 response. Can you give us some examples of what you have seen in this area as well?
Yeah, and look, this wasn't necessarily a surprise in that over the last couple of years, we have seen many more philanthropists be strategic and smart and step into advocacy as part of their toolkit, whether that's funding their partners to build their advocacy capacity, whether that's funding particular campaigns or advocacy programs, or whether that's being advocates themselves, or sort of all of the above. So this wasn't a surprise because we've seen, you know, this really grow in Australia, which is, I think, fantastic. The most obvious area where our members have been active in advocacy is around the kind of job seeker new start messaging. So many of our members were involved in the Raise the Rate campaign, both funding the campaign, working with ACOS, working with other partners, doing the research, promoting and socialising those messages. And so flipping that now into what have we learned with Job Seeker and how do we maintain that kind of level? So lots of our members continuing to fund that. Many of them have funded their partner organisations to advocate for their needs right now, depending on COVID-19. And many of our members who were deeply committed to partnering with communities through the bushfires have actually increased and maintained or increased their advocacy for those organisations as well.
Excellent. Some amazing examples there. Thank you. And finally, Sarah, I've got a final question for you before we jump across and have a chat with Jodi and see what she's been seeing. And we'll delve into this a little bit more with Jodi as well. In the research, 83% said that the value of their corpus had declined as a result, obviously, of economic instability. 50% said that they will still maintain or increase their giving, and 32% will lower their distribution levels. Again, if this is something you want to delve into a little bit more, the links are in the chat box here as well, so you can look at the full survey results. Sarah, those results were from April and analysed in May. Things move quickly in the world today. How is that comparing to what you're seeing now, and maybe what we might expect to be seeing into this next financial year?
Look, I think what we're hearing is that from structured philanthropy, distribution rates for the financial year that's going to end on whatever it is, Tuesday, probably won't be that effective because the markets have bounced around. And certainly in terms of our survey, when we said, look, what do you think your distribution levels are going to be to the end of this financial year? 38% of them said they were going to increase over last year. So what that means is there'll be a significant proportion, I think, tapping into capital as well. Now, remember that not all trusts and foundations can do that. You know, the trustee defines how money can be managed and used, and some can grant capital and some can't, and some have certain formula and some have others. So there isn't a blanket response to this. I think what most people are really nervous of is the next 2 financial years. So the one starting on Wednesday and then the one thereafter. And that's why most of our advocacy work at this time has been with trying to encourage the government to create more incentives for people to give. So the incentive for ancillary funds to distribute more than their minimum with future credits, which is a policy initiative that we have got up, which is terrific. But we're also pushing for concessional loan programs for registered charities and 150% tax incentive deduction for giving to Item 1 DGRs. So I think we're going to see it all over the place. But what I thought was interesting from the survey is that most of the people who said that their giving would probably decline were anticipating market declines and can't dip into corpus.
Yes.
Everybody else was either saying it's too soon to tell, or we really want to maintain, if not increase, giving. So again, I think that is hugely encouraging.
Absolutely, absolutely. And well done, and congratulations to you and your team on getting some of those policy movements through as quickly as they came through as well. That was fantastic to see. We're next going to hear from Jodi Kennedy, but before we do, what is your burning question for today? Please jump into the Q&A box. I can see that we've already got 5 there, but please jump in if there's something you'd like to know today that we can help you with. That's what this is all about. What's your current challenge, big question, or even asking on behalf of someone that couldn't make it here today. We will share the results next as well of a live poll. We're about to launch a live poll that you are going to be able to see at the end of your screen. If you've come in on this on a phone browser, you might not be able to see the live poll, but we're just launching that at your end now. We have been doing a live poll with each of the live shows, and it's just been giving us a bit of a pulse around what's going on and what's the topics that are really present and here with us this week. And we're looking at all of this data at the moment in terms of the next lot of programming that we can provide as well. So the question there is, as either a funder or a fund seeker, what's your greatest challenge right now? You can choose as many as relevant for your organisation, and we'll show you what those results look like. Everyone's jumping in there now. Thank you very much. All right, let's jump across and welcome Jodi again to the show. Jodi, following on from Sarah's insights into the research, can you start us off by sharing briefly the direct impacts of COVID-19 on trustee companies from the perspective of equity, and also share the impacts that you're seeing on the hundreds of trusts and foundations managed there at Equity Trustees?
Yeah, thanks, Julia, and thanks, Sarah. So in our experience, COVID-19 has had a massive impact for Equity Trustees, and I think it's fair to say that it's been an exhausting 6 months for the sector, and it's also been an exhausting 6 months working alongside the sector. So, and look, the team and I know that firsthand because of the hundreds of phone calls and conversations that we've had with the sector pretty much from January this year. that it's bloody tough out there. And so I think what's critical for us as a funder in order to remain relevant and impactful in our giving is that we've managed to change our approach this year, and we've adopted both agility and speed, and really had to do that to be there as things change for the sector, to be able to continue to offer the levels of support that we have. So you can imagine for a company that's got a long history like ours, that's been fairly challenging, and having those hundreds of trusts and foundations has made it just, you know, quite a big thing for us to get through. So primarily though, there are really two key impacts for us. And firstly, it's meant that we've had to change the way that we support the sector. So EQT have prided themselves over the years in being able to make a lot of large-scale multi-year commitments wherever possible in the past. And we've now have to understand and project what the impacts of the pandemic are going to have on our future giving in order to make sure that we can really honour those commitments into the future. So what that's meant is initially that we've had to prioritise our long-term partners and really have a good look across our portfolio of those multi-year funding arrangements. Because a lot of our partners have planned these funds into their financial projections for the next couple of years, and we really need to make sure we're in a position to honour those. Because due to the large number of granting relationships that we have right across the country, it was just a massive piece of work to analyse and really get our heads around what that meant for each of us, and also just to engage with our partners and have a conversation and to reassure them. So in addition to that, we've also been having our short-term lens put on, which is working in the sector right now with what are the acute needs and what are the requests and for help and for funds that we're getting from basically as a result of the pandemic. So in a really short space of time, we've really had to adapt our traditional approach to funding and sort of think about how we could redeploy those dollars differently in order to meet that sort of urgent short-term need. So the immediate trends that we've been getting in terms of requests for funding, we've been seeing a much greater volume of smaller, one-off, untied funds for core funding, and that's pretty much it coming from the sector. So we've just completed our first tranche of emergency funding, and it's been in a more streamlined and rapid response way than what we've ever done before. And it's been really interesting, but we have just learned so much through that process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. No. Are you still going, Lovey?
So no, I was just going to add to that. Obviously, the second impact that we've been feeling is having to navigate, you know, and understand really what the financial impact is going to be on our ability to give moving forward through our charitable income. And Sarah touched on some of this already, but you know, as we all know, that the last quarter of this financial year has been, you know, the financial markets have been hugely impacted, and we are, you know, anticipating that there could be negative impacts that continue for the next 12 to 18 months. So, you know, in the short term, we are going to have less money to give. So because of the fact that we've been historically so lucky to have that year-on-year growth of our corpuses, but the majority of our trust's assets are actually invested in the stock market. So, you know, this is an unusual time for us and an unusual situation for us to be in. So unfortunately, a lot of our trusts, or the vast majority of them, don't have that access to capital that Sarah mentioned earlier, and we don't have that opportunity to supplement our drop in income. So the question that everybody's been asking is, how much will income drop by? So without a crystal ball, that's a really just an impossible question to answer, but we're probably working on anticipating that things could drop by between a range of 30 to 40% in terms of off the back of the high levels of income from FY19. But this is a moving feast, and we are in such a volatile market, and we're going to be monitoring things extremely closely. And we are really hoping that this won't be such a significant drop, but it really is dependent on the pace of recovery of the economy moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. You just touched on something just then about the lifeline grants that you've been able to distribute the last couple of months. I wonder if you can just take us a little bit deeper now, looking at those lifeline grants that you've been able to provide, and just give us a little bit more of an understanding of what they have been. And then also sharing, you know, what happens next? What are you preparing for next? And you've touched on that a little bit in terms of the analysis of the data, but what are you seeing in terms of the next stage of, I guess, grant making style that might start to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Look, we've been really pleased over the last couple of months to have been able to make $2.7 million in COVID-19 related grants to approximately 70 different organisations. So the grants that we've made have really been for very practical things. So a lot of requests that we've had for funding have been for technology solutions, whether that's getting organisations back into remote working or whether it's getting their service delivery model repositioned, right through to sort of complex medical trials, a lot of equipment requests as a direct result of the pandemic, and then just simply core funding. So we have so many great sector partners who've experienced a sharp increase in demand for their services, and it really has just been a lifeline to help them, give them a little bit of help through this period. So beyond the short-term grants, we've really been working with our existing grantees as much as possible, just to give them the flexibility that Sarah talked about. So really obvious things, extending timelines, being more flexible in our application process, saving everybody time and red tape, and just where possible, we've been working with either our clients or our co-trustees to make sure that where people have been allocated program funding, that where they've needed it, they've been able to transfer that across into core funding for operations. So we put all of this on our website, and we're just doing as much as we can to free up as much capital and as quickly as possible, as much funding to really get it out there in this time of need. So it doesn't mean that we're not sticking to our areas of focus and funding organisations who are less impacted by the pandemic and bushfires, because quite simply we have been. So it's just really meant that we've had to deepen our level of engagement with our clients. We've really needed to understand how they're faring, who needed what level of support and when. And it just has meant having more open and honest discussions and you know, talking to some of the queries that are coming back to us from our partners that are causing stress. So it's not an easy time for anyone to navigate. And the most important thing that we as a funder, I think, can do is listen to the needs of the sector and approach these conversations with openness and honesty as things change and develop, which they're going to continue to do. And it's also useful to help our partners to understand the parameters that we're working in and share the insights that we have from the donors that we work with as well, and to reciprocate that open communication line. So, you know, flexibility is critical, and what we've experienced to now, though, may not be the response that we need to be delivering in the next 6 months. So we need to be open-minded about what the sector needs moving forward. So next week, it's the new financial year, and we're really, really focused on learning from our experience. As I said, we've gotten some great insight that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And we just want to really be the best funder that we possibly can. And that involves listening. It involves having online, you know, open discussion. And we're hoping to have an online discussion with a whole range of different partners of ours to make sure that we are actively listening to any changes that we may be factoring into our approach in funding moving forward. So, you know, it's really the same answer that many people are having, and that the sector is having to deal with: flexibility, adaptability, and working together as a team to get through this.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. Jodi, we'll talk a little bit more throughout some of these questions as well, which around people feeling anxious at this time to engage with funders if they haven't done it before, or engaging at this time not knowing how they might be kind of received because funders have got busy, you know, got things going on as well, trying to respond to. We'll bring some of that into something that you and I've talked about, and something that we want to talk a little bit more throughout the show today. I'm just going to jump across to Catherine. Thank you for everyone that is who are registering their questions here in the Q&A box. There's some fabulous questions, and I'm working my way through them on the side. They're showing you which ones we're going to be answering, and I'll have a look at some of these ones next. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you for being here as well with us today. Hope you haven't frozen over there in the corner while we're having a chat. Let's look closely at Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and how things have been for you with COVID-19. Can you tell us a bit about how, and I'm just going to abbreviate to LMCF, I've been saying it for so many years, I'm so used to it, how LMCF has responded and is responding at this time?
Okay, thanks, Julia. It's been really interesting listening to Sarah and Jodi and reflecting here. So maybe the first thing to explain is that we're actually a community foundation and we're 97 years old. So we're here for the big challenges facing the community, and we identify through evidence, what the big issues are, and clearly there's some relating to homelessness and youth unemployment, climate, etc. But we also have a disaster relief policy. So we've been responding to the disasters, including, bushfires and floods and so on, since the 1930s. So it's a very interesting sort of historical perspective. So when the bushfires occurred, we look at our disaster relief policy, and then I develop a response with the program managers for the board, and then exactly the same as soon as we were coming out of that, COVID-19 started. So in our response, we always think about the immediate challenge and the immediate need for relief, and then we look at recovery, medium and longer term, and then we also look at preparedness. So we've actually been doing a lot of work in recent times over heat waves and preparing Melbourne for heat waves. So that's at the other end, but we had to quickly come back and focus on the challenge now. So really 3 streams in the first phase, I guess, which have really been, first of all, the health impacts of COVID-19, and very, very quickly funding some work at the Alfred Hospital relating to treatment for the most vulnerable people affected by COVID-19, such as older people and people with compromised immune systems. So that we were able to get that funding through very quickly, so they could quickly get that work going. And another project we've done with a range of other foundations funding as well, which is a platform called Covidence, which actually shares sort of best treatment clinical guidelines very quickly, and that's being shared in Australia and actually also internationally. So Australia's got very strong health knowledge and expertise, which we're all starting to appreciate a lot. And then secondly, it was really about scaling up to meet demand. So a few people have mentioned that, and particularly talking to organisations we've already funded who have great capability and who were being really inundated in the need to increase their support. So Justice Connect, particularly in relation to homelessness, and Gather My Crew, which is another digital platform where people can bring their crew together in a time of crisis, and they set up street crews and health crews and other crews, and we were able to engage some other foundations as well with that. And also Ask Izzy, which is a platform for getting information about health and community sort of services, but it's an info exchange program, and it won a Google award to get its first funding, but it has no ongoing funding. So for them to actually scale up, and that actually has information about where COVID-19 testing is and all sorts of practical things. So they were just some examples. And then also we started to realise that organisational and sector resilience is going to be, that was urgent for some, really urgent, particularly in the arts and social enterprises, who some had only a few weeks sort of a run on their income. So we were able to fund, say, Collingwood Yards, which we've been involved with since the beginning through capital grants, but just to help subsidise the rent income that would have come from the arts organisations, the sort of emerging and younger artists. So that's been that side. And then two other elements have been, again, in our strategy. And one is clearly unemployment is going to be a massive problem, particularly for young people and women. So we're starting to fund more in that area. We've just funded this morning a project for YACFIC for 3 years to increase their support for young people generally, but also for young people with disabilities, which is going to be an important area. And a number of other white box enterprises have contributed to their loan fund for social enterprises. So that sort of practical area we expect over the next few months will just grow. And then the other side is to say we're still actually really committed to our priorities. So we actually still want more social and affordable housing, and we still want a really brilliant climate transition that brings with it jobs as well. So we funded the Smart Energy Council on the last one, on the renewables-led economy and recovery. And then secondly, Everybody's Home, which is Council for Homeless Persons, and their sort of advocacy piece around social and affordable housing as being part of the recovery. So we've been trying to deal with the health the sort of urgent needs for services, and then now the resilience, and then looking to the recovery and can we build back better? You know, can we actually address some of the long-term issues that we've funded for many, many years as part of the recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a very unique sort of interwoven perspective with such broad but interconnected focus areas. It just couldn't be more connected to the pandemic, reducing, you know, education and economic inequality, increasing resilience to withstand health and social challenges, and alleviating homelessness. Can you take us a little bit deeper, just under the hood a bit? What are you seeing as some of the major impacts coming our way in these sort of areas that you're focusing on?
So one really positive thing that's come out of this has been the rapid housing of people who are homeless in the city, for example. So 900 people have been housed really in the space of a week or two. It was quite amazing when we had to all go into social isolation. And now the emerging question is, how do we keep that? You know, how do we continue to reduce homelessness, and how do we, you know, build a supply of affordable housing? So we're very interested in, you know, how can some of the stimulus funding be brought into projects. So we have a couple of projects at the moment that we're funding, capital ones, where we're hoping that our capital grant will assist in leveraging government funding. And then, yeah, I think on the employment side, where I mean, there's just so much to do. So we're doing more and more work on that, and also on the recovery side in terms of the renewables-led recovery. That I have already mentioned that, but we've got some really interesting projects. One with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, which is looking at energy efficiency in vulnerable communities and vulnerable households, and we're hoping, or we know we are, but I can't really say yet, but we have a couple of other foundations who are going to come in with us on that. And then there's opportunity, if that can be demonstrated, so it's increasing energy efficiency and reducing cost, that can be scaled up as part of a stimulus recovery project as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. And can you, Catherine, give us a little perspective? You know, not many of us have worked necessarily within a grant-making organisation, within a community foundation, or within a philanthropic organisation. What's it like, and from your perspective, what's it been like for your organisation, and what is it a little bit like for funders at this time, you know, grappling in this new environment?
It's been very busy. I think Jodi mentioned the need for speed, and certainly we got through nearly $900 or about $900,000 of grants very, very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic, and today about another 700,000 approved for COVID-19 projects. So we're really busy in terms of, we just have to absolutely get on with it. This is the moment when foundations are needed, and we had a disaster relief fund that we've been squirreling funds away for some years. So we've used about 800,000 from that. So we've actually funded more this year than we were expecting to. So because of the COVID-19 and the bushfires before that. So and then you're trying to maintain the strategy and adjust the challenges that we know we have to do. But at the same time, we also have to understand what's happening now. So the program managers and I are just very engaged in understanding what's going on and connecting with all our networks and seeing what's happening everywhere. I'm watching what foundations are doing overseas, so I'm very interested to see what's happening in New York, you know, in touch with different people in other foundations. You know, one really interesting thing is that the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation, they're taking out loans now to increase their granting capability, which is something really new. Wow. So it is actually like you just have to be looking out all the time and driving the bus in this very uncertain time, and make sure that we're doing where we're needed. You know, we're sort of going where we're needed most, as they say.
Yeah, fantastic, excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you, ladies, for being able to prepare for some questions to begin with. We were able to sort of aggregate some questions that we've been receiving, and now we're over to some of the live questions here today. We've got the next 20 minutes to answer as many questions as we can, as meaningfully as we can. If you haven't participated in the live poll there yet, please jump in and share. It is an anonymous live poll. We can't see who is responding to those questions. And as soon as we sort of wrap up in about 10 minutes time, we're actually going to show you what some of those results have been. I can tell you that the clear runaway at the moment at 70% is we don't know which funders to try engage with. So that's coming through at 70% of respondents. 32% are saying we don't have the skills to engage adequately, and 32% saying just feeling very, very anxious about the future. So please keep sharing with us there what is happening for you at the moment. But let's jump into some questions here. The first question I'm going to jump into is, and we picked up on this earlier, Sarah, with you around the incentives and the government incentives. And this question's from Katrina. Are you seeing much of an appetite from trusts and PAFs in relation to taking up the government incentive to give more than 4% above the corpus?
That's a great question, and the answer is we're not going to know until the ACNC data comes out next year. But what we're hearing anecdotally is that the incentive for some will make no difference because they had already planned to dip into corpus and are very comfortable regularly kind of giving more than the minimum. I'm very reluctant to say the words over distribute, because for a private and public ancillary fund, it is a minimum distribution. It is not a maximum, it is not a recommended, it is not a target, it is a baseline minimum. And so the framing of that should always be seen as that's the bottom level. It can always be more. We know that absolutely some members have taken that as an opportunity to talk to trustees. Because again, remember, in many trusts and foundations, the decision making can be quite complex. You can have staff who are thoroughly professional and immersed in it day to day and totally committed to it, but then you might have trustees that just think about it at 4 trustee meetings a year or whatever. If it's a family foundation, you'll have different views and opinions around it. So it's never an easy, straightforward path to navigate. So certainly we know that the incentive as a kind of formal permission or request, if you like, from the government has absolutely allowed people to have that conversation and has got people over the line. The other thing that we're doing, and we haven't got any data yet, but we keep hassling the ATO, is we also want to see how many people are requesting not to distribute, because it is within the guidelines for an ancillary fund, if they feel that something has happened to them, to kind of request a pause for a year on their distributions. And we have heard anecdotally about a couple of private ancillary funds that have requested to cease distribution. So we're just trying to get some feedback from the ATO around, are they getting more requests than usual? Are they knocking them back, which is what we hope they're doing. But it looked hard to be definitive until we get the ACNC data, but absolutely we know anecdotally that it is pushing people into that space.
Yeah, and look out if you have done that. Sarah Davies
I'll find you
on the doorstep. We've got a question here about the role of community foundations. Question for Catherine from Kate. Interested in your insight on the special role that community foundations as place-based community embedded organisations can play in responding to COVID-19. Kate said, particularly as their solution brokering role as catalysts for collaboration and advocates for their community. Catherine, do you want to touch on that in terms of the role of community foundations? I think we have, what is it, around 42 community foundations, many in rural and regional Australia as well. Love your thoughts on that, Catherine.
I think community foundations are critical at times of crisis like this, and I think the community foundations around Australia, including those in rural and particularly really in rural and regional, will be doing very similar to what we're doing. and trying to understand what the issues are in their community and then help bring other funds into the community as well as their own. So, you know, that ability to understand that geographic area very well and to know it deeply over many years is really powerful. And we're starting to have other foundations talking to us about, you know, giving to us so that we can actually give into Melbourne because we understand it. And I think the same would be for a lot of the other community foundations. It's kind of what we're here for.
Exactly. And if you're listening for the first time and Community Foundations is new on your radar, go and have a look. A wonderful, wonderful part of our philanthropic sector. I'm going to move across into a question here from Cynthia, and this is to do with the lessons that philanthropy may be learning or have learned through this experience of the bushfires and other natural disasters in the last 12 months, as well as COVID. And the question is around how will that be incorporated into practice and the way of doing work into the future. Jodi, have you got some thoughts on that in terms of what some of those lessons might be for the philanthropic sector?
Yes, there are so many. We've also been heavily involved in the bushfire recovery, and we just have so many learnings to deal with. I must admit, I have been telling the team that I'm filling their July calendar up with strategic conversations about how we do things differently moving forward. Yeah. Look, there's so many to choose from. I don't even know where to start, but I think certainly a really practical one for us is moving forward as a funder. How can we embed and change the kind of rapid response that we've just been through in assessing need? How can we take that and look at our own practices, and how can we change what we've been doing for a long time in a very similar way? And we really want to just try to make it easier for people and make it more streamlined. And I think there's a lot of opportunity within the funding sector to be sharing and using and recycling data amongst funders in a much more innovative and efficient and effective way for everybody, to save time, not just for those making the decisions, but also for those people having to actually apply for the funds. So I think there's a big piece in terms of the process side behind funders, how funders are connecting in with potential organisations needing funding. And I think also for us, where we have a large number of donor clients, there's actually a huge amount of learnings that we can take from this period. And we've already started having discussion and engagement and weave it into our communications around how to think differently about the way that we give and how to be more strategic and reactive, and, you know, just getting people more comfortable with this concept of less program funding and maybe more untied funding, and really listening to the voice of the sector and the end beneficiary of those funds. And so I think there's a lot for us to work with there, and for all funders in the sector to really think about how can we do things differently to have a much more impactful outcome for everybody. So there's a lot of work ahead, but we've really crawled to the finish line to next week.
Absolutely. I'm sure Sarah and Catherine, you'd have a perspective on that. I am conscious of how many questions we've got here as well. If we get back to that, it would be great to hear a little bit more around some of those learnings and things, and also things that we're seeing internationally. What are some of the things that we're learning from our peers? Love that about the loans with Ford Foundation. I'm going to look up that one later. For sure. There's a question here from Kevin that we'll answer next. Kevin says, I agree that the response of philanthropy to the crisis has been great and it has been visible, but there is a crisis in the not-for-profit sector in terms of a funding cliff for a variety of reasons. What do the panellists think should be the message of philanthropy to government in terms of the action needed? Sarah, I might shoot to you first to start this one.
Thank you. Look, that's the question everybody's asking themselves. I mean, Catherine's already used the phrase that is now in the common vernacular, the Build Back Better. So we are part of the Charities Crisis Cabinet that the CCA convened, along with many other of the sector peaks and major organisations. We've been working with the Charities, Philanthropy and Fundraising Advisory Group of the National COVID-19 Commission, chaired by Nev Power, all in the vein of how do we make sure that when we move into a new normal, that we design it with lessons and the values that have got us through this period. So many of our members are very active in thinking about how do you design a ramp off JobKeeper and JobSeeker rather than a cliff. And there's an awful lot of advocacy and lobbying going on from us and many others around what that might look like, lots of modelling. What are the values that we see? I mean, I read this fascinating tweet that's sort of in about March that said, who'd have thought it? What's got us through this period? Smart science and big government and a good social security system. So, you know, what lessons do we come out of that when designing this forward? In terms of philanthropy specifically, something that a number of our members are interested in is how does philanthropy best support the charity sector and the community in the build back, from two perspectives. One, in terms of, we know that there is going to be a dominant kind of socio-political economic narrative coming out of Canberra. We're seeing it now for the next sort of 3-4 years. It's around investment, jobs, private sector pulling its weight, you know, building back the economic engines. So how does philanthropy support the for-purpose sector to access that stimulus and be part of that growth agenda? And then secondly, what are the kind of values and characteristics that we have benefited from and learnt from during this period that we need to maintain? So I don't have any answers, but absolutely it is where everybody is turning their brain and attention.
Yeah,
I think, Julia, the report that came out that SVA and CSI did that came out 2 weeks ago maybe, I thought that was excellent. That highlights the fact that the charitable sector is a big employer. It highlights the risk of 200,000 jobs being lost if, you know, if the sort of income projections are true. And it also highlights the contribution to GDP. And I think maybe the other thing that we all need to understand is that without the charitable sector, Australia is not, you know, the country it is. So I think anything that we can do to assist getting that message that it's not just business and government that are going to get us through this, it's actually the charitable sector is critical in so many ways. That's really high in my mind. And that's partly why we're supporting Everybody's Home and, you know, the Smart Energy Council, which are working with a lot of environmental organisations. So some of them have got amazing ideas in terms of employment in conservation, for example. So, you know, I think if you can find jobs that relate to social and environmental advancement, you know, that is a win-win. So, absolutely. Yeah, I think I spent a long time working in the charitable sector before I was in philanthropy. So I've been at that sort of situation where you really don't know where the next dollar's coming from. And I once had a grant from the Sydney Myer Fund, which turned everything around and gave us time to actually renegotiate our government funding and get a tender. So I suppose we're really thinking, you know, that our role could be in helping people, you know, just get through those really tough moments and then they can renegotiate some of the other funding. Yeah. And also in social enterprise. I mean, the reason we funded White Box Enterprises is the idea of those soft loans being available for enterprises, you know, as they go through the transition into something that might be more sustainable from a business model point of view, that's just a great opportunity. Those sort of opportunities where there can be grants and loans that just fill gaps, I think that's going to be important.
Great, fantastic, excellent. That's been really substantial answer to that question. I hope that's really helped everybody understand, I guess, some of the consolidation and the efforts that are happening as well behind the scenes, and we'll be seeing certainly more of that. I'm just going to ask a question here. It's come up a couple of times. We've seen it a couple of times around the focus of philanthropic funding. Some people feel that the shift has sort of come more to Australian shores and less around international giving and international development at this time. Can you perhaps, Sarah, maybe just give us a broad understanding of what you're seeing with Is there changes happening in this way with any funders that are part of Philanthropy Australia? Are they pulling back funding in the international space, or does it just feel that the focus is off that, but it's not actually translating through to the dollars?
So I can certainly give a view of what we're seeing anecdotally with our members, but what we have to remember is our members are philanthropy, so they tend to be the planned and structured giving, not the recurrent everyday giving. So from our members, we have seen no drop-off or interest in their international commitments. And in fact, the funders who have either all or part of their strategies focused on international development and international giving are more passionate about it because they are worried that the general public view might be taken elsewhere. So if anything, they're kind of ramping it up. However, what we know is that many of the Australian international aid organisations and registered charities that work overseas are far more heavily reliant on general giving than many other parts of the charitable sector. So I think, World Vision, I saw some data that is, that 70 to 80% of their revenue comes from individual giving in that sense. And certainly after the GFC, we saw that really take a big hit. I am hearing anecdotally of accountants and financial advisors who are talking to their clients at the moment about pulling their belts in and saying, stop your monthly gifts. So we know that the international aid sector are very worried about their giving patterns in the next few years. Structured philanthropy, we haven't seen any diminution or move away from that. But so I think it's that general giving market that we need to be concerned about. And we have been working very closely with ACFID, which is the peak body for the international development agencies, on proposing to government incentives and ideas to try and maintain and encourage individual giving, which is the 150% idea, for example, to try and keep that going.
Yeah. Overall, do you see any shift in terms of a focus? Is the pandemic resulting in us thinking more about Australians and our Australian life and our well-being? Is there any shift any of you are seeing? It's definitely a question that we're getting a lot of, and I'm not sure if it's real or it's just where the focus seems to be lying.
Look, what we're seeing is a lot of confusion, Julia, on both the donor side as well as the fund seeker side. So I think it's probably a little bit early to say, because we've done some analysis across our client base and we've had a real mixture. Some people have changed nothing. Some people have completely done a pivot in their strategic areas of focus. Many have started giving more money in understanding that they need to actually now have a strategy that may be two-pronged. One may be stick with my structured strategy and approach, but also have funding there that's more rapidly available and is a little bit more flexible in how it gets deployed. So, the really positive thing that we're seeing is that these, certainly this year, these two disasters or crises have actually, we're seeing new money coming to the sector. So we're seeing people who've never given before starting to give for the first time. So often that's not necessarily in a structured way. So it might be, as Sarah said, they might just give once. But what we're really hoping is that this is actually a pattern, and that people give once and then they get engaged, they get some good advice, and then maybe they set up a structured giving vehicle, or just they continue to give on an annual basis. So that for us is really promising. And I think, we really need to use the momentum and the opportunity that we've got now, where people are impassioned and they're really feeling the pain that Australians are feeling, and they're actually stepping up for the first time and putting their money out there. So fingers crossed that it continues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's 3:29, can you believe? Time certainly does fly. I'm going to honour everyone's time here today and wrap this up on time. We do have 16 questions that are still sitting there unanswered, and we are copying them down madly in the background at the moment to make sure that we can address those in another way over the coming week for you. We do have the second part of this show on Tuesday, and it might be over the next couple of days that we can get some of those answers up on our LinkedIn page or something like that for you. Some of them are asked anonymously, and we might be able to aggregate some answers as well for you as well. So thank you very much for asking all of these questions. A couple I've been able to put together and try and get through as much as possible. I'm just going to share here the results of the live poll so you can see what I'm seeing here as well. So that should pop up onto your screen. So very consistent there in terms of what we were saying before, 71% not knowing which funders to try and engage with, the skills, the anxiety. So thank you very much for sharing that. Also 15% saying we can't find information, practical information. So that might be something that we can assist with as well after this show, thinking about how we can get some of those informations out to you as well. It's 3:30. It's been a wonderful session. I feel like we could go on for another hour just on a lot of these questions. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here today. Thank you to all of the team at the X Factor Collective that are helping to bring this to life. Thank you, team. Thank you, Jackie, in the background here today running tech support. Please come and join us on Tuesday. We have Natalie from FRRR and Marie from Australian Communities Foundation. We're going to be continuing this conversation with lots more opportunities to give you support, advice, and answer your questions. So thanks again. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jodi, for being here. Very much appreciated. And I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of your day. All the best.